Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very exciting episode of Gemini Rising. As always, I am joined by my co-host, Anne Wilkie, and today's guest is astrologer and psychic Evan Nathanial Grimm. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a long time coming. I know we met at Conscious Life Expo in February, right? So
Yes.
It's good to finally be on the show.
Well, when we spoke in February, Anne and I knew we were about to launch Gemini Rising, but we weren't quite ready to sort of step out into the world yet. And it's exciting that we are, getting very close to the end of 2024 and you are the guest, because we, like so many, have a lot of questions about what's coming, because the astrology for the last 5 years has just been crazy. But before we get into the astrology, how did you get started with astrology and become this sort of viral sensation online?
Yeah, I really think that astrology found me, not to be too cliche about it, but I had no intention of, going down that path. About 4 years ago, like I think many people, like right during the pandemic, I started to just kind of like look sort of within for some answers, because I didn't really understand exactly like what was going on. The sort of federal response was really confusing to me. And so I started to look at, well, how do I use my free time that I now have? And time and again, people would mention, oh, you should look into astrology, because I'd recently moved to LA from New York. And, while I was in New York, even I was starting to get some inkling of, hey, like maybe there's some, illumination that can happen through spirituality. And but then when I came to LA in the fall of 2020, that's when it started to accelerate. But if I was to like really peel it back to like, okay, what's the origin? As crazy as it sounds, like for me, it was a concussion in 2019, at the end of 2019, right before the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, essentially. And while the South Node was on my Neptune and all this stuff, but essentially I was just like at a dance club and had a freak accident where I knocked the back of my head on my friend's eyebrow. And as bizarre as it is, like that was the catalyst for me, because like that was after like a huge party that I threw, and I was kind of like in this party scene in New York. I was just like constantly like either working or partying, and I didn't feel like I was actually purpose driven at that time. So that concussion sort of like was right on the back of the head. Like I maybe did something with my pineal gland, honestly. But after that night, it was kind of black and white. Started to like communicate with trees on the East River in New York, and just like started to stop and like wonder if, is there kind of a matrix sort of situation going on? But that was all like very much the genesis of it. And like I said, once I moved to LA about a year later, astrology was specifically the sort of medium through which I was exploring everything. And then I read as many books as I could get my hands on from the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, actually, December 21st, 2020. That's when I bought my first book. Read like 15, 20 books over the next 6 months. I saw Robert Phoenix on Gaia TV through this experience as well. And, something about his style really appealed to me. So then I checked out his YouTube and everything, got a reading from him, and it was just a snowball effect. And I think the first platform that I was actually engaged with was Clubhouse. I don't know if you guys were on Clubhouse or you remember that trend. I don't know what happened to it. Like, is it still around?
Yeah, I don't know. I
don't know. I joined and I don't think I ever listened to anything, because there was so many other podcasts and things that I was listening to that for me, it just never kind of took hold. Whereas I have friends that were obsessed with it. Every day I would hear about what they heard on Clubhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fascinating to listen in on the astrology forums that were going on. I don't even remember how I found them, but like it was like really, really cool to see, that amidst the sort of lockdowns, there were still a lot of new technology coming through because of that, in response to that. And, I met people through Clubhouse, and I remember I did a blind reading for somebody through Clubhouse, because I I had been like trying like early in the first few months of learning astrology, doing readings for friends, but obviously like that's totally, biased. I was like, I don't know if this actually works yet. So then I tried reading on someone who I just met through Clubhouse, and I remember just calling her on the phone and being like, okay, let's just see what I find in your chart. And I said something to the effect of like, hey, I think that your father was in a drunk driving accident when you were 12 years old. Is that what happened? And she was like, yes, that's exactly when he was in an accident. And she was is a practicing astrologer, and she was kind of surprised that I was able to figure that out. And she was like, well, you just started, how do you know this? And I was like, well, I'm using the degrees to convert to age, like it just makes sense to me, and blah blah blah. And I just felt like that first reading, I already kind of figured out that I tapped into something. It was just a question of like, how am I going to like develop this skill further? How am I going to refine my craft and so on? And I was still working a job in New York though, remotely in LA. So then I was straddling these two worlds where I was like working for a basically a data analytics company, digital strategy company that Scott Galloway started. He was like a just really well-known entrepreneur. And I was like doing readings at night basically to try to figure out like what the model looked like. And then a friend of mine suggested TikTok, that I just try that to make astrology videos on that platform. And I think it was like the third video I made. I just said something to the effect of like, I made an argument that Capricorn and Scorpio were the best pairing as a couple, which doesn't like totally make sense, but I was just like kind of having fun with it because I was told that TikTok is just like a fun place to, to just make content. Anyways, I made a really short video about that. And I woke up the next morning and it had like 1 million views. And I was like, well, why does this have 1 million views? Like that seems almost kind of ridiculous. So I tried it again with a different couple combination. And then I started making comedy videos essentially where I would just imitate the signs in a relationship. So I would have like the most vomit worthy couple was like Libra and Pisces. And then like the smartest couple was Virgo and Gemini. The, whatever the superlative was, like I just chased it down and just tried all the different combinations. But eventually I was like, sketch comedy for me is not really like the goal. It's just like a fun thing. And then I started trying to do educational content where I would explain like, what is Mercury retrograde? What is Saturn retrograde? And it would still go viral. So I was like, okay, I'd rather do that. And then it developed and matured into more of a predictions related account. So I'd start to do horoscopes and I would start to, talk about, well, hey, I think something's going to happen to Trump July 15th this year and whatnot. And actually, just a quick aside there, at the astrology panel this past February, I remember that was my question. I went up to the mic and I was like, what do you all think is going to happen July 15th? And there's any significance to the Mars-Uranus conjunction? And only like, not to pick on anybody, but there were like, I think there were 5 people on the panel. I think only one, I think it was David, like entertained that the possibility that it would be something. Maybe I think Gemini Brett said something about it too. But someone else on the panel was basically trying to say that like Algol is not actually like a ominous thing. It's like not a big deal. And then afterwards I was like, well, it's actually going to be on Trump's midheaven. Like I just like followed up and, there we are, a few months later. So I don't know why. I just remember that. But yeah, so I just sort of tapped into a psychic ability, not just through that prediction, but other predictions. And just in doing readings for people, I'm able to, figure out if someone's adopted. I'm able to figure out if someone has a thyroid issue, like all kinds of things like that. And anyways, it's just opened up a totally different life for me. And so, yeah, there's obviously 1,000 other stories underneath that. But that's essentially been my experience. Is just like a strange crossover journey from somebody who went through the assembly line of just like typical, like, typical education, went to Northwestern in Chicago. So like most of my friends are, in hedge funds or consulting or iBanking or something. And suddenly like, I was just thrown out of that world. It was like, that's not useful to you. Basically the universe was like, that's not where you're supposed to be. Even though my Saturn and Capricorn kind of like is okay with that in a way. I was ripped out of that world in 2020. And yeah, now I fully embraced the new path.
Wow. Talk about a COVID lockdown story. You completely transitioned. So, I mean, there's so many things that I could ask that I would like to ask about to follow up with that. But what have you identified in your own chart what led to that moment, led to it being such a big life transition?
Yeah, I think that my north node has really been getting hit by a lot of planets lately. Because I was born in late 1990, and right before the lunar nodes shifted over away from Leo and Aquarius. So I have my south node at 0 Leo, north node 0 Aquarius. So that Saturn Jupiter conjunction was right on my north node, and that was like, to me, like a birth of it's a new paradigm, I guess, like just a new way of looking at life. And then Pluto has been on my north node off and on for 2 years, and I talk about that with David a lot whenever we meet up for a show or something. The fact that he's a 0-degree sun in Leo, I'm a south node in Leo, 0 degrees. So I know he talks a lot on his channel about the sort of like the plight of that, of getting hit by Mars retrograde right now, or Pluto and Aquarius. And, I resonate with that. I mean, those nodal transits, for me have changed my life completely. But, also I'm a Scorpio stellium, sun, moon, Venus, and Pluto in the 5th house. And I think the 5th house obviously is going to make me I'm just myself and on a stage, whether it's as a musician as well, which I know a lot of astrologers are musicians, or, doing videos and stuff. I'm almost like not myself when I'm off a stage, which is kind of tragic in a way. It's kind of weird. You know what I mean? Like it's a double-edged sword to be like so comfortable in front of an audience, and then so like weirded out by the fact that I'm alone or something. Like I don't do well just like having alone time, actually, in some ways. But in terms of the other aspects of the charts that I've learned about in my own chart over time, that I see in a lot of clients' charts, is like, I have a lot of fixed stars in my chart. So my ascendant is conjunct Sirius at 13 Cancer. My Mars is conjunct Aldebaran. My Mercury is conjunct Antares. So have a bit of a Crusaders energy in that way. And I noticed that with the Antares Aldebaran stuff. A lot of like preachers will have those placements, or whatnot. So I just feel like I have strong convictions, and I just have to share my opinions with the world somehow. And then the connection to Sirius I resonate with a lot. Just feeling like a misfit growing up and being like, why don't other people have dreams on other planets at night? Like, is there something going, like, was I shot in a vessel from like, or a capsule from millions of miles away? It's kind of how it felt. But yeah, astrology's given me a place to belong, right? Even though astrology already is almost like a gathering of the misfits, I think. I mean, which is great.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I love that.
I'm really curious. So you were saying that you almost don't feel like yourself when you're off the stage, but in your previous life before, I think of it as a universe knocking you over the head to sort of redirect you to where you were meant to be. How was that existence for you? Because it doesn't sound like you were on the stage in any way, shape, or form prior to.
Well, I mean, before I became an astrologer, I was playing music, playing shows like maybe once a month or something like that. So that was sort of like my main outlet. And I find it interesting to have Pluto in the 5th, because I kind of go through these extremes in my life with creativity. So from the age of maybe 11 until 29, I probably wrote a song almost every week. I mean, obviously that's an exaggeration, but it felt like that. I mean, I would basically be playing music every week, playing with other artists every week, or writing songs. And, I don't know how many shows I played as a rock musician, probably like 300 or something, but like a good amount. And my parents were musicians, rock musicians. So that to me shows up in the chart. I read the birth chart as a sort of a map of the parents as well. And so anytime you have the sun and moon in the 5th, it's like, there's got to be somebody in the family who's creative. So I grew up like going to venues, going to my parents' concerts, being surrounded by other musicians. And I mean, my mom was even playing while she was pregnant. Like, it was crazy. Like, I think she was playing when she was like 8 months pregnant. So I was up there from the beginning. But I've noticed that since I transitioned to becoming a content creator, I'm not really writing that much music. So which is really, it's actually something I'm trying to fix right now. But I've noticed with Pluto, that's kind of an area of the chart, right, where you just experience things as like all or nothing. And so it's like I went from a time of life, many decades, where it's like I'm a musician first, and then whatever my job is second. And now I'm kind of an astrologer first and a musician second, and then everything else third. So yeah, I think that that's something I'm grappling with right now, is like, how do I preserve my creativity in this in this new sort of line of work? But
But I think being an astrologer, it is really creative, isn't it? Or are you expending your creativity on a more personal level with clients? Do you do a lot of readings, or are you mostly doing videos?
yeah, I try to do somewhere between like 500 and 600 readings a year, which is
Wow.
arguably probably too many. But I, in the sense that, you know, energetically, it's like, you know, obviously that's very taxing. But I've done something on average like 500 to 600 readings for the past 3 years every year. And if you include the mini readings, I used to do these like 15-minute readings. It's probably somewhere in the ballpark of like 2,000 readings in the past 3 years. So I've kind of like lived in, that's actually the area that I feel most refined in, is like doing one-on-one readings, because I've kind of like hacked into like new methods. I mean, every astrologer does this, I think. Like every astrologer has their secret sauce of like, well, I figured out this trend or this trend. For me, it's a focus on the family. Like when I do readings, I focus probably half the reading on the family, the ancestry, parents, grandparents, which I think is my destiny as a Cancer rising, with Chiron in Cancer as well. Like I really think about, okay, what are the underlying traumas here, but also, you know, the really good things is, you know, that people can unlock. And I just kind of think about it like the roots of a tree. Like the chart is not really just the person who's getting the reading, maybe a branch on the tree, but I try to focus on the roots. And so something I try to figure out, and I'm still trying to figure out, is like, well, how do I communicate the insights that I come up with in readings in broad-based videos that are trying to appeal to everybody? That's something I haven't figured out yet, because I want to share those case studies with people. Because I've done these readings where, you know, we talk about, I'm sure you've both experienced this too, where you connect with someone about something that's so profound for them, where you talk about how, okay, you were very, very, you know, conflicted about, or you had a lot of conflict with your mother growing up, but then when you started a family, you healed that, like whatever it was. A lot of people have these types of stories, but they come out through the readings. And I'm always like, wow, that was really powerful, but I don't really know how to communicate that with my audience. So it's kind of a weird situation where like the videos people see of me online that I make are kind of like the tip of the iceberg of like what astrology actually is all about. Not in the sense that the videos are, you know, valueless or anything, but there's a really rich sort of undercurrent of like ancestry, family dynamics that are so personal to people that it's like, I don't even really know how to articulate them on a platform, let's say like TikTok, where you can get shadow banned if you even mention, you know, certain topics that are kind of sensitive. So it's like, that is something that makes me wonder, like, I don't know, how do I go about that? But anyways, the readings for me are the most rewarding, I would say, just because like you have like the whole terrain. You have like, it's just like your intuition at that point and the method, obviously. But like when I make videos, I have to think about, okay, is this going to be relevant to at least 1/10 of the population or 1/12 of the population or whatever? So
Doing so many readings in a year, how do you just protect yourself energetically and spiritually from that? Because it's a lot.
yeah, it is a lot. Well, obviously, I mean, I think like setting boundaries with your schedule is really important. I mean, I do practice like, you know, saging and using Palo Santo. Every morning I do breath work, and I really try to focus on all 7 chakras and unblocking them. And you know, there's some other methods I use, like, you know, sort of breathing out sort of a golden cylinder around me to protect myself that way. I also have I actually just got in Sedona a shungite pyramid that I think is going to help block like EMFs and stuff. So there's a lot of, you know, it's a good question. And next year, what I'm actually going to do is I'm only doing 100 readings, because I want to be really intentional about it. I feel kind of like, you know, it's almost like I've gotten a lot of reps in, right? And I feel now that it is best for me going forward to focus on fewer readings. And I think a lot of astrologers go through that at some point. They decide, hey, I want to focus on my newsletter, my media content, whatever it is. I've made the decision to say, okay, I'm going to do 100 next year. And then after that, well, TBD, I guess. But my vision actually would be to hire other astrologers who would go through a specific mentorship program that I would have, where they would be trained in like my method of focusing on the family. So I think that's like the long-term vision. But next year, I'm just like really, really strict about how I use my time. And it's a great question because, you know, the answer is like, you know, astrologers, psychics, etc. Like they can't do unlimited readings. It's just not possible. And when I started out 4 years ago or whatever, or not even, I guess, it was like sort of natural for me to be like, oh, I'd love to, you know, just do a little reading for someone at a party, because it was so new and novel to me of like, oh, like someone would be like, hey, can you read my chart really quick? I was kind of excited about it. I was like, yeah, I'd love to try that. Now it's like, I don't even entertain that. You know, it's like if somebody stops me at Erewhon and is like, hey, I'm an Aquarius rising. Like literally this happened to me a few months ago. Someone stopped me and was like, you know, you're that guy from TikTok. What I'm an Aquarius rising. What's my love life going to look like for the next year? And I was like, honestly, like, I don't know. I'm not gonna, and I do know, but I also don't want to share it. Right. And yeah, David and Robert and I were talking about that a couple weeks ago. And like, we were kind of joking, like, what if you just told them something really bad? But
well, you know what Pluto does.
Right. And
will you even be around to have relationships? No.
Right.
I'm only joking because I know Iggy was in the chat and he's a 0-degree Aquarius. So, you know, got to scare him a little bit.
Right. Right. Well, that's the other thing too, is I've noticed that everybody on TikTok and Instagram too, like they all have chosen their own flavor of astrologer. And I'm a very Saturnian and Plutonic astrologer. Like I'm very direct, very hard hitting. Like I don't, I know, and there's no right way to do it, right? But I know that there are people who aim to like, hey, let's raise just the vibrations right now. Let's make everything more positive because there's enough negativity in the world. I totally buy into that premise. I just am not that kind of person. I tend to be like very honest, very blunt. And it's like, if I think that stuff is really dire or kind of like challenging right now, I'm just gonna say it. And some people are like, why is this guy always so intense, or why does he always like furrow his eyebrows? Like, what's going on here? And it's like, I don't know. That's just the way that I choose to communicate when I'm making short videos. But obviously, like if we're having organic conversation, I'm not going to be like, oh, it's all, you know, one way or the other. But I don't know. I think we're just like in an interesting age of, obviously spirituality is timeless. It's always been around, but the way that it integrates with social media is like, it is very, I don't know, very tricky, I guess.
So I am curious because I personally enjoy a very direct communicator. I don't want somebody beating around the bush and trying to sugarcoat something that can't be sugarcoated. But there is always a debate between people around astrology as to whether the astrology is fated. So what's happening is happening and that's it. Or there are those like me who are of the belief that you can transcend any transit that you're dealing with. It doesn't mean that it's the definition of what that transit is or the explanation of it changes in any way, but it's, to me, I look at it as a tool and a guide as to how I need to navigate through things. And when things are, especially if it's a crappy transit, as it's hitting you hard, going, okay, I understand what's happening and I understand that it's going to last for this length of time. So I need to find the best way I can deal with it to make it through and come out the other side. I'm just curious as to whether, I guess, you're of that same mind, or if you're a bit more of a fatalist, that this is a transit, it's going to suck and that's just the end of it.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to believe that astrology just provides the parameters of the game, and it's up to us what to do, how to react, which path to take. I think that astrology can only predict the themes, not the absolute outcome. And apart from some nodal transits, though, I mean, I do think that there are some like eclipses or nodal transits that almost do kind of like push someone, like the concussion, for example. I think my concussion was probably out of my hands a little bit, but I do agree with you. I don't think it's fatalistic. I think the approach I try to take in my videos, and I guess this is kind of where I was initially trying to go with this, is that in my videos, I really try to communicate, okay, here's a spectrum of possibilities and here's what you can do. So like worst case scenario, mid case scenario, best case scenario. And I kind of think about it like back when I was a data analyst in New York, it was like, I used to make predictions actually in my old job. I would try to project like how valuable a market would be or an industry would be 5-10 years in the future. And every time I was like making projections about like how many, like how much is the payments industry going to be worth or whatever, or how many mobile payment transactions will there be 5 years from now, I would basically come up with like the, the base case, the bear case, the bull case, et cetera, and like project out like, okay, there's kind of like 3 general sort of like trajectories. I kind of apply that to astrology too. Like there's an example of like, okay, here's what would happen if someone did nothing. Like if they were completely mindless and had Neptune on their Venus right now or something, they would probably either start dating a con artist, or they would be completely deceived in their relationship, or they would date someone who they're just trying to fix. In the best case scenario, they would identify sort of compassion. They would find compassion with someone who they're dating, or they would get into fashion or something. So I try to frame the videos as like, here's the sandbox that oh, my dog just joined.
Yay!
Oh,
Definitely.
what's the dog's name? What type of dog?
Well, his name is actually Smoky Quartz.
Oh,
and both
He's
of my
3.5
dogs
years
lifted their heads up
old
too.
somehow.
So cute.
Smoky.
he's gorgeous.
He looks like an appropriate Scorpio dog.
Yeah, yeah, he really is. He really
Black
is.
animals are my favorite.
Yeah,
I was looking for a black dog when I found Bumble.
Oh yeah,
He was very blonde.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh, you have a dog. Okay.
I did.
Oh, you did. Sorry. Okay.
No, it's fine. Sorry, you were going to say something about Smokey.
Oh, yeah, he's 3.5 years old, but everybody, whenever I walk him outside, people are like, so how many months is this dog, this pup, and it's like, he's, a Yorkie poodle, combo. So, and very rare to have he's a very rare dog, but, yeah, it's, I mean, yeah, so I was just saying like, there's a spectrum of possibilities and people can use the transits how they want. So in my videos, I always try to say like, okay, realistically, yes, this transit sucks right now, but here's the opportunity. Here's how you can turn it around. And I think like we live in this age of social media where sometimes people watch just the first 5 seconds of the video and they're like, well, this guy's doom and gloom. But it's like, if you watch to the end, it's like, oh no, but here's the narrative. It starts out this way, but you can change your luck by actually doing something about it. Some sort of like a personal responsibility astrologer or something. Yeah, I feel like it's good to be honest and comprehensive about like where things can go. So I always just take that stance. I know that there's a lot of also manifestation accounts nowadays that believe that everything is the mind. And, if you're positive, like completely positive about everything, and you say that every day is the greatest day of your life, then that's how it will play out. I tend to believe that it's kind of a hybrid of the two, because if a manifestation sort of like expert gave you their birth chart and they were like, and you were tracking their transits every day, it's like their positive mindset is going to take them pretty far. But it's like, if they're in the middle of like a Saturn moon conjunction or something, like they might be having some bad days or some challenges and like maybe not admitting it to you, but it's like, I can tell that you're going through something because you have Saturn on your moon. So I kind of think about it as like astrology is the sandbox. And you want to understand like what is the energy that's kind of available to you, what are the themes that are coming up, and then on top of that you layer in the positive mindset and the proactivity. I don't think that it's not fatalistic, but it's also not like blind just positivity. I think that that's also dangerous. I think that both extremes are dangerous. We can't really buy into just the fatalistic doom. Can't buy into that, like we can't buy into the idea that like I can manifest anti-gravity right now just by with my mind. So yeah
I really like that approach. I would not be paying attention, I think, to an astrologer that doesn't go in depth about things. And so where some people feel all astrology or spiritual advice needs to be light and airy, that doesn't appeal to everybody, and some of us tune that off. Right. So I really like that approach, because I guess actually I want to take an example of, let's talk about Mercury retrograde, because we are in a Mercury retrograde. And My question is this. So Mercury retrograde has become something people refer to now, just almost like, oh, it's Friday. So everybody knows what that means. And it's even people who don't pay any attention to astrology beyond that. But I wondered if you would say a little bit about how even a beginner can differentiate between Mercury retrogrades. I feel like this particular Mercury retrograde has been very impactful on my life, and for me, like having to deal with electronics or whatever, it has really been severe for me. But how can we differentiate between them? What should we look at to go into more depth about Mercury retrogrades, and what's your view of those?
Yeah, it's a great question because I mean, definitely not all the retrogrades are created equally. Some Mercury retrogrades are sort of like ships passing in the night, and others are just like an absolute storm, right? So I tend to look at obviously what sign it's in. That's going to determine some of the themes and the energetic filter that it's passing through. But I would say primarily focus on the conversations that Mercury is having with other planets by aspect. So if a Mercury retrograde is, let's say, meeting up with Jupiter or something, that to me feels kind of nice and like an opportunity, because Jupiter is the greater benefic, that like there's an opportunity there to just see the wider view and widen the aperture. If Mercury was to retrograde and conjoin Saturn, then it feels a little bit more dour, like suddenly maybe realizing that something has to end. Whereas like a Mercury retrograde on Jupiter is that maybe something is more limitless than I imagined, or more bountiful than I imagined. But now, like, for example, we're in one where it's kind of both, which makes it really confusing and entangled, because like it's squaring Saturn and opposing Jupiter, and almost was kind of squaring Neptune at one point. So we're kind of being pulled and yanked in different directions in this particular one. But I think that as a general rule of thumb, like anyone who's like interested in studying or anticipating a Mercury retrograde, I would focus primarily on, again, the aspects between planets. That's going to give you the greatest context. And then the zodiac sign that it's passing through is going to be like the second layer to me. I tend to find that aspects are more important than zodiac signs, actually. Which, as a quick aside, that's how I structure my videos. So when I make a video, I don't actually talk about the zodiac signs. Like I never make a video where I say like all Scorpios are secretive or all Sagittarius are optimistic. I don't really do that stuff. And I think that that's a good thing, because obviously, like, it depends on what planets people have in those signs and whatnot. But anyways, yeah, I think that would be my approach. And in general, Mercury retrogrades are going to create challenge in mercurial areas, which would be technology, transportation, communication. I think travel's a big one, but just like Mercury helps us connect things, it is the connector and the messenger. But I think about it like it's not just connecting us or connecting information or data like between computers or something. It's connecting our own thoughts inside our minds. So when Mercury's retrograde, it can be harder to complete the thought or say something the way that we intended. And that's where a lot of the fights come up right now, because Mars is retrograde too. And I was born with Mars retrograde, so theoretically I'm kind of good right now. But even still, it's like I do believe that there are externalities in retrogrades, meaning there's other, like, you are affected by other people who are experiencing the retrograde. So like just because I'm a Mars retrograde doesn't mean that I can skate by easily through it, because 90, I don't know what percentage of people have Mars retrograde, but it's very low. So like 90+% of people are trying to figure out this Mars retrograde. So like I'm going to get caught up in that for the most part. But yeah, so that's also just another dimension to this. It's important to be careful with communication, electronics, travel when a Mercury retrogrades 3 to 4 times a year. But if you have Mercury retrograde natally, in theory, it's a little bit more natural for someone. But again, you're interacting with people who are dealing with it. So I think it's like pretty complicated, I guess, in that way. But.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always fascinated by this theory that if you are born with, say, a planet retrograde, when it does retrograde for the collective, you function better, because I was born with Mercury retrograde. I don't think it's any easier when it retrogrades. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but just I have learned as I've learned to understand astrology better, that when things start to not function, and just especially technology, if I'm working, if I'm editing, if I'm on the computer and things just stop working. In the past, I would have completely freaked out. Now I just go, Mercury's retrograde. And I will literally stand up and walk away and go, I bet you it'll work tomorrow. And I come back and everything's fine. So but this thing that you do better if it is in your natal chart, I'm yet to see the proof.
Wait, are you both Gemini risings? By the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what about you? What's your rising sign?
I'm a Cancer rising.
Oh, that's right. You said that already.
Which is my least favorite aspect of my chart. But well, maybe it's a tie between that and having Chiron in the first house. But yeah, I mean, I can see also with Gemini rising, just having the Mercury, the chart ruler as Mercury, being more sensitive to it. I almost kind of think about myself as having Mercury retrograde, just because I have Mars retrograde in Gemini. It's not really the same thing, but it's like a lot of people from late 1990, we all kind of have these quirks with like the way we communicate. I've noticed that. And it's just I think people from 1975 have it too. Yeah, late 1975 people have Mars retrograde in Gemini. And that segment of like late 1975 also can have a bizarre sort of way of thinking, I guess, or like communicating. And when Mars was retrograde in Gemini in 2022 and 2023, in my what I've noticed, basically where I'm going with this, is that if a retrograde happens like in its natal position where you have a retrograde, then I think it's like really like you're locked in and you're really firing on all cylinders and like things are going well. So like when Mars was retrograde in Gemini, that's when I grew my accounts like crazy. It was like, I was going live like 5 times a week on all the social channels and just like powering through. And it was really exciting for me and really stimulating. And I felt like a lot of other people were struggling with the retrograde, but that was like, yeah, I mean, I would imagine Mars retrograde in Gemini would just be like a total clusterfuck if you're not born with it.
Well, I was rear-ended 2 times during that transit. And then I think I was finally out of it when I got broadsided. So it wasn't a great transit for me, but it was actually in terms of mental revelations and just kind of epiphanies about, but it seems like something else was hitting that too. Maybe it was just when it was on my rising that it was one of those times where I just had these downloads of I should be doing this, or it took me on a completely different path. So I don't know. Good.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the Mars retrograde in Gemini is very precarious for driving. And in my own birth chart, I mean, I'm lucky I haven't been in an accident yet, but my dad was paralyzed in a motorcycle accident when I was 13. And I think that was the Mars retrograde in Gemini for me, because it's in my 12th house of hospitals. So not great, but I find that, when Mars is retrograde in Gemini, that is a huge risk. It's like driving and traveling, and he does like motorcycle. He was doing motorcycle racing, just like very Mars Gemini type of thing. But how was the previous one in Gemini for both of you? I think that was like late 2007, early 2008. Let me look this up. I think it was that was like the time it was retrograde. Let's see. Yeah, it was in early 2008 that it was actually retrograde in Gemini.
Okay, so both of those sucked for me. The last one we just had, so I'm an Aries sun, Gemini rising, Gemini moon. So that retrograde, I remember turning up to the Highvibe studio to film Full Disclosure, and I always come in and Bumble would be with me. I was like, hey, and I was always pretty chill. I have walked in that day and said, is this what the next few months is going to be? And David's like, what? And I was just, it was so awful. And he's like, all right, we'll look at your chart. It's fine. We did the show. He looked at my chart. He's like, look, it's going to be rough at the beginning. It's going to be rough at the end, but in between you should be okay. But I felt like I was hanging on for dear life. But the beginning of 2008, I was trying to untangle myself from the abusive ex that I was still living with. My mother had just died. Like, when I say it was a freaking mess, it was a mess. But by the sounds of it, by the time the retrograde was ending, my life was in a completely new space. So ultimately, it was a good thing, but it feels like getting through those Mars retrograde in Gemini for me, a little bit rough.
Yeah. I mean that those Mars transits retrograde are really tough sometimes. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. I think even that year, that Mars retrograde was tough for me. But I was like a junior in high school or something. I just remember like having a crush on the same girl as like 2 or 3 of my friends, and it was like just really weird. It was just like a bizarre time, because she was like, I like this guy. And it was like she basically like fell for my best friend. I was like, it was just like one of those high school things where you're like, wow, that really sucks. But in retrospect, it's like whatever. So
Yeah.
So what are you good, Anne, if I ask a question?
Yeah, I was
Right.
only going to mention that we spent a lot of time talking about that Mars retrograde on our episode, that last episode where I filled in for Natalie on Full Disclosure. And so if anyone wants to hear what happened to me at that time, you can just go watch Full Disclosure, because I talked about it there. But it wasn't anything. It was sort of looking back on it to think about what this Mars retrograde might be like for me now. So anyway, go ahead, Natalie.
Oh, so I was just going to ask, because the other retrograde, just while we're on the topic of retrogrades, that doesn't happen that often, but we have coming up in 2025 is Venus. Yes, it's Venus retrograde, isn't it? Yes. So for me personally, because I haven't looked into Venus retrogrades enough, every time they're coming up, I always go, oh, and it's always fine. But I'm curious from an astrologer's point of view, your thoughts on Venus retrograde.
Yeah. Again, I think it really depends on like what part of your birth chart it's activating. There's definitely been Venus retrogrades that I have not noticed really that at all, because I've gone backwards, obviously, like from my pre-astrology days to see like, did I notice that? Did I notice this? And the Venus retrograde in 2025 definitely feels very heavy in a way, because it's retrograding back to Saturn. It's actually going to station direct, meaning it's moving forward again in a conjunction with Saturn on April 12th. So, that this upcoming Venus retrograde is going to hit the signs of Aries and Pisces. But I think when it goes back into Pisces, that's kind of a no nonsense type of retrograde. So I feel like Venus retrograde really, at least as I experience it and as I study it, it is a revisitation of like what we value, actually. Because like I think about Venus as like, yeah, self-worth, but also like personal values. And by reflecting on like what we value, suddenly it becomes clear to us like what needs to stay and go in our relationship sector. So I had actually Venus retrograde on my in Leo last time. It sort of passed across my south node at one point in Leo, but it didn't retrograde on the south node for me. But like everybody from 89 and 90 pretty much had Venus on their south node. So a lot of people I know from those 2 years had like their relationships like decimated. And I don't know, whatever years, like, so we'd go 18 years backwards to find the last time the south node was in Leo. But like anyone with the south node in Leo was hit pretty hard by that. So, because like the south node is, again, like a little bit karmic, or it is karmic. It's a little bit out of our control. So I would say like if someone had their south node between, I believe it's like 24 Pisces and like 8 or 9 Aries, or 10 Aries actually, then yeah, they would probably get hit with some karmic stuff. But I think for the most part, or if you have Saturn maybe in that band of the zodiac, but I think for most people, it's like you can get ahead of it basically by understanding that, hey, like, I'm going to have to be really, really honest with myself about like, what do I value financially, politically, ethically, personally, like whatever it is. And are they aligned with the people who are in my life? So like if someone's in a relationship where one of them voted for Harris and one of them voted for Trump or something, and they can't figure out how to reconcile their political differences, like that would be exposed. Or if somebody loves to spend money in the shared account and the other person is more of a hoarder and they don't want to spend money at all or something, like whatever it is, it could create a lot of drama in relationships. But yeah, I think the Venus retrograde is really, really like dependent on the aspects in someone's chart. But I do think relative to the last one in 2023, if I'm being honest, I think this one's more difficult just because it goes back to Saturn. It goes all the way back to Saturn and Neptune. So it's kind of like, do I really see this person clearly? So I think that if someone is untruthful in a relationship, like that's really going to catch up to them, especially because like I think about that Neptune or the Venus retrograde on Neptune is like, well, is this person a con artist? And the retrograde going back to Saturn is like, oh, they definitely are, or they definitely aren't. Like, that's sort of it's like reality bites kind of thing.
Do you happen to know what degree it's retrograding to in Pisces? Just because my South Node is right there. I'm like, I don't need I don't need another hit.
Well, the retrograde starts at 10 degrees of Aries, ends at 24 Pisces.
Oh, okay. So I'm all right. I'm 17 degrees is my South Node. It'll hit my Mars and Mercury and midheaven though.
Oh, wow. So your Mars and Mercury are in Pisces or Aries?
Pisces. I've got a stellium in Pisces. Venus, Mars, Mercury, midheaven, and South Node.
Wow. That's a lot of Pisces. I don't know how you find the Mars Mercury conjunction to be for you, but I find that conjunction to be really fascinating because I have a Mars Mercury opposition, which is really rare because Mars has to be retrograde for that pretty much. But I find that the conjunction kind of has similar experiences. I mean, do you feel like was there a point in your life where you felt like it was really easy to get into arguments with people? Or
oh yeah, and I even thought about being a lawyer because most people.
She's the most peaceful person.
But most people hate arguing with me. They just go, it's impossible to win against you. Because once I'm locked in, the desire to fight and the ability to speak kind of come together, and that's it. Which works in a lot of cases, but sometimes it can work to my detriment.
Yeah, I've noticed that play out in my life. I mean, early in my life, I was looking for basically like a verbal brawl at every moment. And over time, I've learned that it's kind of like my life is defined by what I don't say, but then just as much by what I don't say as what I say. And I think it's kind of the opposite if someone has like Mercury, Saturn. It's like, well, you got to speak sometimes. But I've noticed like Mars, Mercury, it's like knowing when to pull back. That's always been really hard for me. Because like there were times when like my dad's a Gemini stellium, so I kind of get the Mars Gemini. I think my Mars Gemini indicates that pretty much. But I love my dad, but he doesn't really know when to stop talking. Like that's and so I grew up in that situation where he would talk a lot, and talk over people, and my mother is very quiet. So I sort of witnessed that, and in my early life, I was like, I'm just gonna imitate that, right? Like I'm just gonna imitate those dynamics. But eventually I still struggle with this, but I have to figure out as a Mars Mercury opposition when to stop rambling. Like that's really hard for me. Like, yeah. If both of you were like, Evan, just ramble for 2 hours, like, I could figure it out. But I don't think that would be an enjoyable experience for anyone on the show. So like, yeah, I was just curious, how that conjunction kind of plays out for you.
So when I was younger, I didn't have the easiest time growing up. And so my weapon was to fight, and I was very verbal, and I probably pushed it too far. And so having that temper, and also being Gemini rising, Gemini moon, I do talk a lot. And people will sometimes say to me, do you know you talk a lot? Yes, I'm very aware, and there are times where I cannot shut up no matter how much I want to. And it's also a sign that I'm tired when I can't control it. And that's when I go, I have to just go to bed or walk away from people. But in terms of picking fights, as I got older, I learned to control that part of me. And like you, there are times where, as much as I would like to say something, the mature part of me realizes that it's not helpful, it's not kind, it's not necessary. And so just stay quiet. But if you get me fired up, well then.
Yeah.
So I love a good debate.
Yeah. Yeah. Wait, Anne, where's your moon? I'm curious.
Me? I have a Libra moon. I have Libra Mercury, Libra sun.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and my Mercury my Mars is in Virgo. My Mercury, I think, is the planet that's most opposed to Saturn in Aries. But I also,
wow, that's interesting.
I was going to say, I also have a Neptune Venus conjunction. And so every time you've brought that up, I've thought, so what does that mean? Am I always going to be picking con men? Are they going to con me in the end always?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot better actually to have it conjunct than, I don't know, square or something, or opposing. I mean, well, I like Venus Neptune aspects. And I think this is interesting too, to talk about how there's a huge gap between like theory and practice in astrology. There's, the idea of a Neptune Venus aspect, and then you experience it in a transit and you're like, oh wow, that's what it's like. And right now I actually have Neptune trining my Venus. I've had it for like 2 years now. And I know the trine is different than a conjunction, but it has given me a much better understanding of Venus and Neptune together, which is like, the last 2 years, I've gotten a lot more into fashion. I was only like halfway interested in fashion before that. I've gotten, again, I've gotten more into like being creative in visual mediums like this, like video. And I think of Venus Neptune conjunction, and as you're doing, obviously, because I've seen your show with David, the History of the Stars show, which is a great show. And and you have a fifth house stellium, like that's clearly, you're clearly meant to be in that sort of creative context. And it's Gemini, talking about history. I mean, Geminis and Sagittarius, I think, are the historians of the zodiac. And I find that Venus Neptune sometimes will play out where, and actually I have Neptune on my descendant, by the way, which I would argue is kind of the same or a similar thing. It's one of these things where you can see certain situations very clearly, like if you're talking about history or you're interacting with someone in, let's say, a customer service context where you just want to get, it's very transactional, you just want to get something done. You can maybe like navigate that very rationally and clearly. What I've noticed is like when you get close to somebody, the closer you get to somebody, like the more the fog comes in. And it's like the one-on-one intimate relationships tend to be where the deception plays out. But I think it's something that we just mature through over time, And the other thing with Neptune and Venus is like not trying to fix somebody. That's, I think, the hardest part. A lot of times, like people with Neptune and Venus really feel everything that the other person is feeling. So it can be very hard to, it's very easy to give them a pass actually for something. And to say, well, they're struggling with this thing right now, so I kind of understand why they were really cruel to me, or I'm going to be the one to change them. That's usually what the Neptune Venus expects. And again, like I'm talking from a place of empathy here, because I have Neptune almost exact on my descendant, like it's a degree off, and that's tough. That actually might be the toughest part about my chart. I've been in relationships with people where it lasts a long time because I have Saturn in the 7th house. But when I get out of the relationship, I'm like, I don't really understand how I was with that person, which I think a lot of people experience. I think everybody has some type of experience like that. But for me, it's like even more pronounced. Like I was just thinking about, because someone brought up that this, an ex-girlfriend of mine from college, that she got married. It was a Mercury retrograde moment. My friend was like, oh, did you know that so-and-so got married? And I thought back to that relationship, and I was like, I really can't even like identify our compatibility. like even in retrospect. Like I don't really understand like what was going on there, but I think that's just the Neptune fog, you know.
Do you think, because I'm always curious about this, when Venus goes retrograde, people talk about ex-lovers coming out of the woodwork and all of that. And every Venus retrograde, I wait for it and it never happens. But for me, they come out of the woodwork with Mercury retrograde, along with everybody else.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I tend to find that too. It's more common during a Mercury retrograde. Yeah, I think it's because Mercury will dictate the communication channels, and so you're more likely to actually hear from them during Mercury retrograde. I think Venus retrograde is more of a hey Smokey. It's more of a slowdown in in relationships where it's like the pace of the relationship. If you're in a relationship, the pace slows down, and you're like suddenly like, do I really want this, or is this like going well? Or again, we're reflecting on values more so, and money and finance and creativity and all the Venusian things and spending. So yeah, I don't think I've experienced it as much either with Venus retrograde. I think where it is the most acute, the effect is the most acute, is when Venus and Mercury are retrograde at the same time. So yeah, every time that's happened, I've really noticed it. And that's going to happen. I mean, that's going to happen at one point. I think it's like March 14th through April 7th next year. Mercury and Venus will be simultaneously retrograde. So Mercury will be in Aries and Pisces also. So like a Libra. Wow, Smokey really wants to be on the table.
Hey, we're very happy to have him.
Yeah. He's he always. It's funny because he only jumps on the table when I'm going live on TikTok, not Instagram. But I guess he also will do that for Gemini rising. So
well, he knows how much we love dogs, and my dogs are over. I have black and white Maltipoos. They're over there, sleeping through it. I guess they're bored of it. But normally one of my cats will show up during Gemini rising.
I love that. Yeah, he's he's very he picks up on voices too, like when I'm on the phone. Like if I'm on speakerphone, he'll respond immediately, rush over, thinking it's somebody's in the house all of a sudden. But I think the Venus Mercury retrograde, that's kind of the hot spot next year where, some people may be dragged back into like a relationship, but I really feel for Virgo risings. I mean, I talked about this in a video recently. Like, I think Virgo risings are the most likely to actually like get engaged or married next year, but juxtaposed with the Saturn conjunction and Mercury and Venus retrograde, it's like a lot of them might be splitting up with people, actually, more likely. So I think Virgos have it the hardest next year, and maybe Pisces too. But as long as, well, I guess Natalie, you do have a lot of Pisces placements, but I was gonna say, as long as you don't have a lot of Virgo or Pisces in the chart, it should be fine. But
I'm going to temper this, or hopefully, because I'm going to find the positive in this. You talked about in one of your videos about the sign that could have the best or the worst year depending on how they navigate it, and that being Gemini. And so I always pay attention to those videos because with Gemini rising, Gemini moon, I'm like, I kind of fit into that box. So what is it that will make the Geminis have a good or a bad year?
Yeah, I mean, I was really toying with the idea of like, is it Cancer or Gemini next year who will have the best year? And, it became very obvious to me when I dived into it a little bit more that it would be Gemini. And, it's because Jupiter's still in Gemini. It's retrograde right now, but like when it goes direct in early February, Geminis can see the bigger picture with Jupiter. I know that David talks about this too, but and I agree with him that Jupiter is not inherently signaling luck. I mean, it's not really, it's not like people can passively just welcome it into their life. But I do think when Jupiter goes direct and finishes the transit through Gemini, that should still be better for Geminis than it is now. I also have noticed that a lot of Geminis have struggled to show up every day this year. I mean, really show up and put on a good face of I'm just going to take on the day. It's going to be a good day. I know a couple of Geminis personally who have like I phrased it in a really like kind of like a you know, clickbaity way in the video, but I was like, you know, some Geminis have faded into obscurity this year. But like honestly, you know, some Geminis have kind of retreated a little bit. Like they've felt like maybe they don't want to be in the spotlight right now, or it's not working when they try to. And that's the Saturn square. I mean, the Saturn square is really hard. So what I like about next year though, is that Geminis are getting just the tail end of that Saturn transit in Pisces. Like Saturn is leaving Pisces, at least for a good chunk of the year. And when it goes into Aries, you know, it's in the 11th house for Gemini sun. I do like sun, moon, rising type of horoscopes, but like really for Gemini risings. And again, it's in the 11th house relative to Gemini sun and moon. It's like, you know, it's getting out of the 10th house. So with the North node in the 10th house next year, basically what I'm saying is that limitations become opportunities for Geminis in their career specifically. The eclipses will happen in Gemini's 10th house, which is unpredictable in some ways, but I think the North node is like aiming, you know, in the right direction, ideally towards potential and dharma. And the other thing is Jupiter goes into the 2nd house next summer. And so Geminis, as they kind of like move up in their careers, like there could be more money associated with it with Gemini or with Jupiter in the 2nd. And then Uranus goes into Gemini, which was really horrendous for Tauruses because it's fallen in Taurus. It's like, you know, it's giving Tauruses the opposite of what they want. They want the consistency, the consistently pleasant experience, and Uranus is changing the channel every 5 minutes. So with Geminis though, and actually Alex Skiles was talking about this with me the other day or the other month, that Uranus should just like rule Gemini. Like just like give Uranus to Gemini and give Mercury to Virgo. And, you know, I think it's an interesting take and not bad. Yeah, it's not a bad take at all. I think it's like, you know, you think about it, Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. It's a collective sort of network or consciousness. And Gemini is ruled by Mercury, but it's the more playful Mercury than like Uranus and Virgo, is not quite as strong to me. But like Uranus and Gemini can actually like make Gemini's ADHD style actually make sense all of a sudden to everybody. And like everyone's going to be moving too fast while Uranus is in Gemini. It's sort of like, it's not like Mars in Gemini really, but it's sort of like it's a frenetic energy, certainly. And I just feel like, you know, speed and agility are just going to be highly valued during that Uranus and Gemini transit through 2032. And so like out of all the signs, like if Gemini was to turn everything around overnight for themselves, it would happen next year. It wouldn't happen right now though, per se. I mean, Saturn is direct now, which helps, I think, sort of remove some limitations. But, you know, again, a lot of Geminis I know are just kind of having to deal with responsibilities they did not sign up for. Or maybe they did. I know a Gemini rising who became a parent this year, which is very much Saturn in the 10th. But, you know, I think that no matter where Gemini's, the reason I gave it to Gemini's basically is like, no matter where Gemini's at right now, like no matter how far they've diverged off their path, their ideal path, like they can get back on it next year. But it's it's very much dependent on whether or not I hate to sound cliche, but like whether or not they put in the work, which is Saturn still in Pisces there. And also if they welcome innovation and agility and new ways of doing things, which I think Geminis can do. But everything hinges on that, I think. Acceptance about responsibilities and prioritizing responsibilities, but also embracing something that is like completely shaking up their usual ways of operating, I guess. So
I feel that was an accurate description of the past 12 months for me. Anyway, Anne, I don't know how you feel as Gemini rising, but this year I have spent the entire year trying to get certain things going because last year was really hard. And I finally feel like I'm getting in front of things now. And so it's like I'm setting myself up for 2025.
Well, I've been wondering about, because also we're both Aries, Libra, and we've been dealing with having the North and South node going through our signs as well, right? So I was just wondering, as you were saying that, Evan, what impact does that have on signs? And what is going to happen when the nodes switch into Virgo and Pisces?
Yeah. Well, that's another reason why it's very much like, it's very much not a guarantee that Geminis would like automatically have the best year, because like when the nodes are impacting someone's modality, I guess it's going to change the channel in some big way. And there is a little bit of like fate taking the wheel kind of thing. So like, I don't know, just to give you an example, I'm a Cancer rising, so I had the North and South node in my 10th, 4th house this year, and squaring, my ascendant, my descendant, and so on. I mean, I had a hell of a time trying to like move this year. I had like so many disastrous like attempts to move homes or move to a home, and then I changed my mind about this apartment place, and then I moved again. It was just like a total shit show, and I had the South node in my 4th house. I have the South in my 4th house right now. And at the same time, the North node has been in my 10th, which I do think has helped me in my career, though. So like for Geminis to have the North node in the 10th, like Cancer risings did this year, I think is a good thing overall. I just think that with Saturn there, it's showing that like, okay, if you want to accomplish this thing or reach this benchmark that you have for yourself, then it does require that Saturnian sort of consistency, dependability, and effort. But, the North node can change things overnight, and so can the South node. I mean, I talked about how my concussion happened when the South node was on my Neptune. And, that was actually a time where in Neptunian fashion, I was partying too much, going out drinking all the time. And the South node was like, you're going to get out of that lifestyle now. So the South node can take away things that don't serve us anymore. And then the North node may kick in after that and say, I guess in that case for me with the North node on my first and on my ascendant, it was like, no, this is who you're going to become. You're going to become an astrologer or some, psychic or someone you're not right now. And I think we should always welcome the nodal transits. I would just say like eclipses should be embraced by people. Like I think that's something astrologers on TikTok primarily, they have a bad reputation around eclipses because they overhype them as like this doom and gloom thing, and sometimes it does bring in like a plague or something, but like for the most part I think eclipses are just it's turning the page. Like I had the eclipse when the eclipses were in Scorpio, right, or Taurus and Scorpio for the last couple of years. Like that obviously affected my 5th house stellium, and there was like a lunar eclipse in Scorpio on May 15th of 2022 in my 5th house. And that literal night, I created a whole new type of video content that I still use and I still work with that ended up like quadrupling my audience. So like, I remember that night because I remember watching a video by, I think it was Chani Nicholas. I think it was her, but like, she said something to the effect of like, don't even look at the eclipse. Like, don't even look at the moon tonight because it's like blood red. And I'm like, my Scorpio stellium was like, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to go out there and look at the moon tonight. And just like,
that's what I do.
And, just appreciate it. And then I went back into my apartment and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to make this video where I say that Scorpios are actually doing really well right now. I just wanted to give Scorpios like a bit of a pep talk. But I didn't, the way I gave this sort of like congratulations speech, I didn't reveal the sign until the end of the video. So I was like, instead of doing my usual thing, I started the video saying this zodiac sign is crushing the eclipse, whatever it was. And then I slapped the Scorpio sticker at the end, and it just like opened up a completely different way to go viral. And then I noticed other astrologers starting to copy me. And now it's like all these astrologers are doing it. And it's like, I don't even really do it that much anymore, but I keep seeing these videos from other astrologers being like, this sign, these 2 rising signs, these 4 signs. And it's like, yeah, I mean, been there, done that. But like, my point is that the eclipse allowed that to happen. It kind of inspired me in a way. So I think the eclipses are, it's a perfect portal to walk through or to go into and to change everything. And I really do think that, we have some say in that. I think if we're taking inspired action, I guess.
Mm-hmm. How big is the collective going to feel the shift of both Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries? Because they'll conjunct, I think it's in January 2026, but they're both in and out of Aries through 2025.
Yeah. So I would consider them conjunct next summer, just because they're occupying the same degree. They're both going to be at like 1 degree of Aries for a while, station in late June, early July, and then retrograde in a conjunction together. I think that the collective will really start to feel it next summer. But like you said, early 2026 is the actual conjunction. But I feel that Neptune, Saturn is going to really affect the healthcare industry a lot and the way we approach health. I also think that it's going to come about, or a lot of regime changes are going to happen during that time. If I think about the 1989 conjunction and the fall of the Berlin Wall, there certainly could be something around certain institutions, governments collapsing, which we've already seen in Syria, as Saturn station direct, as Neptune station direct. I think that's interesting how the Syrian government fell apart as these right after Neptune stations direct, which means symbolically it kind of heralds that conjunction, because as Saturn and Neptune are marching forward for the next few months, they will eventually reach that conjunction next summer. So that is kind of a harbinger of what's to come. And it's interesting that the conjunction is happening during that final Jupiter-Saturn square next summer, when Jupiter goes into Cancer. And I think it has a lot to do with the way we look at, again, personal health and how we take care of ourselves and what we're putting in our bodies. I do think that there's some element of that. Maybe there will be some kind of disclosure as well around, we'll just call it extraterrestrial life in some manner. I don't think it's far-fetched to, we've already seen some inklings of this. Like maybe they, in true Saturn and Pisces fashion, maybe they're in the water, maybe they're in the oceans. Like that would actually be kind of on point with the current transits. But I think with Pluto in Aquarius, people are making contact with, with beings that are, extra dimensional. And it's sort of on point with what I think Pluto in Aquarius will symbolize, which is potentially the legalization of certain substances that were previously caught up in the war on drugs, or maybe, it will be just people turning away from pharmaceuticals just towards other natural remedies. Because everything that's happened the last week, with the United Healthcare CEO is also part of this. People are if you look at Twitter, it's all these conversations about, hey, healthcare companies, the profit motive is sort of affecting the healthcare companies in this way. And anyways, I think the conjunction, it's very complex. I think a lot of changes are going to occur at the same time, but ultimately it's a weakening of the foundation in the sense of the castle is built on sand kind of thing. And so all the sort of paradigms and globalized organizations that were built up in the early 90s after the fall of the USSR are suddenly seen as ineffectual or ineffective. And whether it's because they can't respond very effectively to what's going on between Ukraine and Russia, I'm thinking of NATO, who knows, maybe NATO will have to be, will be seen differently, especially if the Trump administration decides not to participate in some of the wars. So I think that's really what it's about, is global consortiums and cooperatives and whatnot, and global organizations suddenly will have to be reevaluated. But the last thing I'll say about that is, with Pluto in Aquarius on top of this, I do think we're entering an era where things are going to be localized more so. Because, for a number of reasons, the food supply, the way we, farm and the way that we provide food is not healthy. The way we store it is not healthy. Basically mass production is an issue. Maybe there would be a pandemic that puts scrutiny on the mass production of food. And I think people will start to localize their food. I also think politics will become more fragmented because, there are certain states that are already posturing to block Trump from doing certain things. And we have Uranus and Gemini next year and Neptune. And it's like you said, Neptune and Aries, which are sort of civil war echoes. And I mean, who knows if it would actually be a civil war, but it wouldn't surprise me if like the country becomes increasingly fragmented in response to things that Trump is doing. So, yeah, I mean, it's the disillusion of a lot of systems, including maybe our own.
Mm-hmm. I'm just sitting here listening. I want you just to, what did you say before? Because any one of us then could probably take over and ramble on for the whole show. And that's kind of when Natalie and I message back and forth. It's always, I know I'm just rambling on, and then we just keep going. So that's why we have to use voice messages. But so do you think 2025 will be a year that's kind of 2 years in one? Like, how do you see the year? Is it going to be bipolar or what?
Yeah, it might be. I think about it. I kind of bifurcate it into the retrograde pandemonium of the first 3.5 months or 4.5 months, and then everything after that. So like November 25th of this year through April 12th of next year, 4.5 months, there's only 1 week where one of the personal planets isn't retrograde, meaning Mercury, Venus, Mars. That's pretty rare, so we have like all this reflection opportunity, the pace is slowing down. It's like, wow, like this is not, this isn't manifesting as quickly as I wanted it to, like kind of feeling. But after April 12th, and then as we get into Mars post shadow in early May, there is going to be, very much. I mean, the way I described it, I guess the way I would summarize it in my videos I did for the horoscopes for next year, I was like, this year it felt like there were some zodiac signs that could kind of sit on the sidelines and watch things happen. But next year, everyone's thrown into the action. And it's because most of the social and outer planets, so like Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, are in fire and air signs all of a sudden, rather than earth and water signs, with the exception being Jupiter going into Cancer. But because of the fire and air influx and the masculine polarity, the yang polarity coming through, it it's going to create this dynamism and this a lot of activity that, again, it's sort of whiplash, because the retrogrades at the beginning are so slow and coagulating, and then the rest of the year is moving at hyper speed. That's how I see it. And when Uranus goes into Gemini, trining Pluto and Aquarius, it's like AI is going to hit escape velocity. It's like not even going to be, it's going to happen overnight, where AI is going to be able to replicate so many different professions and jobs and processes that we did not think it could. And, it's obviously going to affect the labor markets, and there's probably going to be a lot of regulation around AI, social media platforms as well. But there's no way to stop the train from running. So that's the feeling next year, is that we have technology reaching this point where it's matching human sort of cognitive abilities in a way that is kind of scary. And I talked about this with David and Robert, but I just see like 2026 as the year that could actually bring about a global war. We kind of are in one already, but like Mars is going to join Neptune and Saturn in Aries in April 2026. And that to me feels like all hands on deck, where there's like either a draft in the US. I keep thinking there's a draft in 2026, but even if there's not a draft, it's like the US is involved in some kind of war. And, that like 2026 to me is really the year that gets, can be very difficult, because also the North and South node are going to hit 9 degrees of the mutable sign of Gemini Pisces, which squares the Aldebaran Antares axis I talked about earlier. And I think the North and South node, when they square those fixed stars, can kind of create that religious war energy or the crusader type of energy. So with Mars and Aries conjunct Neptune and Aries, it feels like people are fighting in a sacrificial way. And I think religion will play a big role next year with the North Node in Pisces. People are going to turn towards religion like they haven't maybe ever in their lives. And that's just what happens when you're at the end of the age of Pisces. And I think we're about 100 years away from the age of Aquarius. And I know everybody has a different timeline for that, but like I still feel like we're at the last sort of step of the age of Pisces. And as that happens, like people are going to coalesce around monotheistic religions maybe for like the last time. And it's like there is maybe another religious war coming. And after that, then like people will fully tap into that sort of like, you know, more new age spiritual sort of strain. But like right now, I still think that religion is going to have its sort of final act in a way. I'm not saying it's like never going to be around again, but it's like definitely playing a big role. And so anyways, if I could summarize next year, it's essentially like quantum leaps in technology, sort of like breakdowns in the food supply and people turning to local sources of food more than ever. And the specter of war increasing because also Pluto is opposing the World War II Pluto right now. And Mars is actually retrograding on the World War II Pluto. But when I think about that, you know, time period, obviously I think about nuclear power with Pluto and Aquarius. We're going to look at like different energy sources, hopefully not in a war context, but like, you know, there will be a lot of cyber attacks next year, shutdowns of the electric grid, and people are going to turn towards other sources. But also there's going to be wars that are in the cyberspace, right? They're not entirely those traditional wars. And then I guess the last thing I would say about this is currencies will change. So the United States dollar is not safe, in my opinion. I think that, you know, the hegemony of the dollar is going to be thrown into question because, you know, Pluto was in Aquarius last time when the dollar was created. So the US dollar is going to have its Pluto return eventually, not next year, but, you know, we're going to see like maybe something with Bitcoin, although I don't think that's the only thing, or like the BRICS nations having their own sort of rival to the dollar. So, yeah, it's a lot of changes, like you said, but ultimately it's all about the meta trend. If I could just summarize though with like one headline, it's the shift into fire and air. It's all going towards fire and air now. And so if you have a lot of earth and water, like myself in your chart, then it's going to make for a confusing time in some ways. If you have a lot of fire and air, then like, you know, you're basically back in like the late 90s when there was a lot of fire and air and a lot of action. So yeah, it's just like stunning how many planets are shifting signs in the same year, right? Like, I mean, all of the planets are changing signs if you include Pluto, just like kind of being in a new sign still. And so, you know, would the world be unrecognizable a year from now? I mean, it could be. I mean, it really could be. And I think a lot of it will be driven by, again, AI, quantum computing, with which Google, I think, just launched today, some kind of quantum computing thing, while Venus and Pluto were conjunct. But also the marketplace of ideas is going to be shut down in some areas. Like we've seen Australia ban social media for people 16 and under. We don't know if TikTok's going to be around in 2 months. Whatever the case, there is going to be a crackdown on social media platforms. And, you know, which is a huge problem. I mean, I'm all about the free exchange of ideas. Like, I think that's obviously how we are doing this right now. And it's how I learned about astrology and theory, is just by like, you know, seeing who's like making content out there. So I think that's another thing to look at in 2025 is just like how, yeah, our rights to just kind of speak freely, are they guaranteed? Like, I don't know. I don't think so.
Before we get to the final questions that Anne and I always ask, in your opinion, what is it that marks the beginning of the age of Aquarius?
Well, I don't think there's a clean cut between the ages. I tend to find that they would overlap, but I believe that the age of Pisces began around the time of Christ. So we're talking about, you know, the 0 AD basically. But each age is the astrological ages are approximately 2,166 years or something. If you were to divide the overall cycle of the Earth's wobble or whatever, if you were to divide that by 12, you would get about 2160. But I know Robert Phoenix talks about this, but there was an Aquarius stellium in like 1960, either 1960 or 1962, and that may have sort of kickstarted the age of Aquarius at least a little bit. But I think we're still in the age of Pisces with flashes of the age of Aquarius. Because Pluto's in Aquarius now, that doesn't mean that we're in the age of Aquarius. It just means that the collective unconscious may be driven towards Aquarian things, which actually would dovetail into the age of Aquarius eventually. But, you know, people disagree on the astrological ages, right? Like I've seen content from people saying the age of Aquarius is not until the 2400s. I've seen the age of Aquarius is now. I think that people should just use common sense and like look at what's happening in the world. And the fact is, technology has made quantum leaps that are very Aquarian in the last few decades. And yet it's not fully manifested yet. So I would make a strong case that in the 1960s, we at least started to see flashes of it. But we're not really in it yet. I just think about it like waves overlapping or something.
So Anne and I always like to ask everybody the same 4 questions as we're ending the show. First question is, what makes you laugh?
Oh, wow. What makes me laugh? That's a very Gemini rising question. Well, the thing that makes me laugh without fail is probably Chappelle's Show. That's like my favorite sketch comedy of all time. And anytime I turn it on, it doesn't matter what episode, I just like, I laugh hysterically. So that would probably be the thing that makes me laugh. Also, when people purposefully laugh in a weird way, like I don't know. I know someone who like purposely laughs like in this really weird, like dry heaving way, and it's almost like a clown's laugh. It makes me laugh like a lot. So yeah, I think there's a couple things there. But I don't know. Maybe I'm like trying to think like hopefully other things make me laugh too. But I would say, well, you know, there's a lot of memes out there that I get on Instagram that people send me that I try not to look at sometimes because I'm like, oh, this is like ridiculous. But then I end up looking and I'm always laughing at those, just like the basic memes of like, I don't know. I watch a lot of relationship memes. About just the stuff couples go through, and usually it involves like cats as an analogy or something, or some kind of voiceover. And I don't know. That always makes me laugh. So.
Okay, great. So from that too, who would you say was your biggest spiritual influence?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, I mean, this is kind of an interesting answer. I would actually say the singer of the Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan. And I watch his interviews like almost religiously, and I don't think that he always intends to phrase things in a spiritual way, but I think that he has a very spiritual just frame of mind. And I've been watching his interviews since I was like 22 or 21 or something, and they're my favorite band, so I'm kind of like really tapped into the music as well. But I just find that when he does interviews, it's like very profound. It's like it's kind of creative, it's spiritual, it's practical, it's like all these things. And I don't know, like in an indirect way, he actually kind of influenced me. And he's a Gemini moon, 9 degrees on my Mars. So he has that Aldebaran conjunction. But I would also add, though, that if we're being kind of literal about it, my like the first scripture, I guess, that I read that like really turned me on to spirituality was the Bhagavad Gita, actually. So I read that in 2012. And so I read that scripture like multiple times in the summer of 2012. And that is the first time I like was completely opened to the spiritual realm. And it just like told a story that really made sense to me. It felt like I had read it like many times in many other lifetimes, and I believe I did. And it's kind of unfortunate that I didn't stick with the sort of learnings from that necessarily, because like I read that at a time when I was like about to be a senior in college. So like when I was reading it, it just like opened my mind completely to a different reality or outside of reality. But then I went back to school for senior year, and I just kind of went back into my party life. But and my, I did study here and there, but that was my awakening actually. So just that document, I guess, was like the most, and that document is still like way at the top in terms of influence, in terms of ideas. Like astrology is still important, but it's like here, and the Gita is like way up there.
And what would your advice be to people on how to transcend fear?
I would say, in my very real lived experience, it's been daily breath work, actually. I really think that, right before and right after we go to bed, that's when our consciousness is starting to slip into the sleep state or out of the sleep state. And when we get our brainwaves in that sort of zone, that's the opportunity to get out of the fear. Because we live in a world where fear is being thrown at us constantly in order to generate attention or to capture attention. And I started doing breath work 3 years ago, the Wim Hof method, and almost 4 years ago, actually. I do it every morning. And I also imagine myself as being in a forest, a specific place in the world, but many thousands of years ago, before there were like a lot of people around. And basically, as I do that, I go through the Roy G. Biv chakra spectrum. And by starting my day without the phone, just doing breath work, that kind of like almost sets my nervous system up for success that day. Like I don't have to, I don't have to consciously get out of the fear because of that. So I think that daily meditation, for me, it's breath work, but like some kind of daily meditation to start or end the day, or ideally both, to me is the quickest way and most effective way out of the fear, because it trains your brain to, it doesn't spiral right away, and you're able to hold your attention by meditating. And I think most people get flustered when they get fear. Like the fear comes through being flustered, and we're flustered because of these things. We're always getting notifications about things. So I think it's making sure that you have a sanctuary each day, like a sacred space.
Okay, so the final question is, what's the best piece of spiritual advice that you've been given?
Wow. Great questions tonight. Best piece of spiritual advice that I've been given. Wow. Yeah, well, I actually think it was from a reading I got with Robert Phoenix a couple of years ago. Because I had just started doing readings myself, and he was like, what do you think you're here to do in this lifetime? And I just kind of like knee-jerk reaction. I was like, well, I think I'm supposed to wake people up to astrology. And he asked me again, he's like, what are you here to do? It's like, what do you mean? And he's like, I don't think that's not what you're here to do. You have to figure that out. And I was like, it's just such a bizarre question to ask again. And I really respect that, though, because 3 years later after that reading, I'm like, wow, I am not just an astrologer. It was like a very mature question to ask at the time. And in my naivete, I was like, well, I cracked the code. Like I figured out something that I can just carry with me throughout my life. Like I won't have to worry about anything else. But that's not really how it works, right? It's like the path. It's a quest. And, I'm a Sagittarius Mercury, so I naturally believe in the quest. I think it's about the journey. I don't think every chart necessarily would agree with that, actually. I think some people might be like, well, someone who's all Capricorn might be like, well, I just want to meet expectations every day. But for me, it is a quest. It's a lifelong quest. And, you know, I added psychic to my list of professions in the last few months or last year, I guess, because I do see that as like something I've built into my repertoire. And after that, it's like, who knows? Maybe it'll be something beyond that. So I think anybody who's like exploring spirituality should, you know, kind of heed the advice that like all rivers lead to the same ocean. And, you know, why not explore all those rivers or get to that ocean? Like, however you want to use that analogy, it's like, you know, we live in this kaleidoscopic fractal universe. And so beauty is reflecting itself. And why not just explore all of it?
I love that.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I love that. Evan, thank you so much for joining us. We have waited a long time to get to this point and have this conversation, and it was fantastic. I feel like we could go for another hour and a half easily and still not touch on everything. And Anne, thank you so much, as always, for being my ride or die through all of this. And a special thank you to Smokey for joining us on this episode, because that was really special.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, guys. Evan, I'm going to attach all of your links and everything in the description below so people can find you, book readings, get one of the coveted 100 spots for 2025. And to everybody watching, thank you so much to everyone that joined us live in the chat. We always appreciate having you here. Make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe. And Anne and I will be back with another episode very soon.
Amazing. Well, thank you both for tonight. That was great.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.